You don't belong in first-class 6 words that would cost this luxury aviation company everything. But the man in jeans and a baseball cap they just denied had no idea he was about to witness his own staff destroy their careers with systematic discrimination. When Marcus Sachs walked into his own premium terminal dressed as a regular traveler, the shocking treatment he received from gate agents would expose an aviation scandal so deep that what happened next made industry history. Watch as a courageous pilot risks everything to identify his CEO. A brave passenger secretly documents the entire discrimination on camera, and the moment when Marcus reveals he owns the very plane they refused him access to sends shockwaves through everyone who thought they knew their place. This isn't just about one man's fight for dignity. It's about the grounding of an entire operation that proved sometimes you have to land before you can reach new heights. Stay until the end to see how 6 words of discrimination became the catalyst for an aviation revolution that's still transforming how we fly today.
You don't belong in first class. Those 6 words would cost this luxury aviation company everything they thought they knew about their most important passenger, but the man in jeans and a baseball cap standing at their premium check-in counter had no idea he was about to witness his own staff destroy careers with a single act of discrimination. What happened next will leave you speechless. But first, let me tell you about Marcus Sachs and why this seemingly ordinary Tuesday at the airport was about to become aviation history. The Sterling Executive Terminal gleamed like a monument to luxury at Atlanta's premier private aviation hub, where billionaires' jets lined the tarmac like expensive toys and the waiting lounge rivaled 5-star hotels. This wasn't just any charter service, this was where Fortune 500 CEOs conducted business at 30,000 feet, where celebrities escaped paparazzi and climate-controlled comfort, and where a single flight cost more than most people's annual salary. Every detail whispered exclusivity, from the hand-stitched Italian leather seats to the crystal champagne flutes that never held anything less than Dom Perignon. The very air seemed to carry the weight of wealth and privilege. But walking through those polished doors on this particular morning was a man who looked like he'd taken a wrong turn from the commercial terminal. Marcus Sachs pushed through the heavy glass entrance wearing faded Levi's, a worn Atlanta Braves baseball cap, and carrying a simple black backpack that had seen better days. His sneakers squeaked slightly on the marble floor, and his casual button-down shirt looked like something from a department store rack rather than a designer boutique. To anyone watching, he appeared to be exactly what he wasn't, someone who clearly didn't understand the unspoken rules of private aviation. What they couldn't know was that this unassuming figure had revolutionized luxury air travel for an entire generation. Marcus Sachs had built his aviation empire from absolutely nothing, starting with a single leased Cessna and a dream of making premium air travel accessible to successful professionals of all backgrounds. He'd fought aviation regulators, challenged industry discrimination, and created service standards that were now copied by airlines worldwide. Sachs Aviation Solutions operated over 50 luxury aircraft, employed hundreds of aviation professionals, and it transported everyone from tech innovators to world leaders across the globe. The Sterling Terminal was his latest venture, a partnership with the Airport Authority designed to test whether luxury aviation could maintain its premium standards while serving a more diverse clientele. He'd invested millions in the renovation, personally approved every aircraft in the fleet, and handpicked staff members who he believed shared his vision of excellence without exclusion. The brass plaque near the departure lounge bore his name as founder and primary investor, though he wondered if anyone bothered to read it anymore. Today's visit was purely investigative. Disturbing reports had been reaching his corporate office for weeks, complaints from successful black passengers who described treatment that seemed more dependent on their appearance than their ability to afford first-class service. His chief operations officer had compiled a troubling file of incidents, each one more concerning than the last. As a black entrepreneur who had faced discrimination throughout his rise in the aviation industry, Marcus understood these patterns with painful clarity. So he decided to experience his own service through the eyes of someone who looked like the passengers filing these complaints. He traded his tailored suits for street clothes, left his luxury car at home, and taken a rideshare to the terminal. His team had no idea he was coming. This was pure field research, the kind of real-world testing that no focus group could replicate. As he approached the premium check-in counter, Marcus felt the familiar weight of being underestimated, a sensation that had fueled his ambition for decades. He'd built an empire by exceeding expectations, and something told him this morning would be no different. If you believe that respect should be standard at every altitude, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you think Marcus will discover. This story is about to take off in ways nobody expected, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when assumptions meet reality at 30,000 feet. Subscribe because stories of dignity in business affect all of us.
Right at that moment, Marcus stepped up to the gleaming check-in counter, and the first crack in his perfect aviation world began to show. The gate agent, an impeccably dressed woman named Rebecca whose smile seemed as polished as her manicured nails, looked up from her computer screen with the kind of professional assessment that had been trained into her over years of working with high-net-worth clients. Her eyes performed a quick but thorough scan from Marcus's worn sneakers to his casual baseball cap, and something subtle but unmistakable shifted in her expression. "Good morning," Marcus said, his voice carrying the same confident tone he'd used in boardrooms with aviation executives across the country. "I'd like to check in for the 11:30 flight to Miami, first-class service." Rebecca's smile flickered like a light bulb about to burn out. "I'm sorry, sir, but our first-class cabin is completely booked for that departure," she replied, her fingers not even touching the keyboard to verify his claim. "However, we do have availability in our premium economy section, which I think you'll find quite comfortable for the price point." The subtle emphasis on price point hit Marcus like turbulence, but he'd expected this kind of assumption. What surprised him was how smoothly the discrimination flowed, as if Rebecca had delivered this exact speech countless times before. Behind his calm exterior, Marcus felt the familiar sting that had driven him through business school when classmates questioned whether he could afford to be there. "I appreciate that," Marcus continued, maintaining his composure while mentally cataloging every microaggression. "But I specifically requested first-class service when I made my reservation. Perhaps you could check your system again?" Rebecca's professional mask began to slip slightly. "Sir, I understand your disappointment, but our premium cabin is reserved for our established clientele. You might want to consider our partner airline across the terminal. They offer more budget-friendly options that might better suit your needs." She slid a pamphlet across the marble counter with practiced efficiency, its edges crisp, and obviously prepared for exactly these moments. The brochure featured a discount carrier that Marcus actually knew well. He'd helped finance their startup 3 years ago through his venture capital fund. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so insulting. But then, the universe decided to provide the perfect contrast that would make this discrimination crystal clear. The terminal doors whispered open, and a white man in nearly identical casual attire strolled in jeans, polo shirt, baseball cap, and the same confident stride that Marcus had just displayed. He approached the counter with the easy assurance of someone who had never questioned whether he belonged anywhere. "Hey there," the man said cheerfully, flashing Rebecca a smile. "I know this is last minute, but any chance you've got a first-class seat on the Miami flight? I'm willing to pay whatever it takes." Marcus watched Rebecca's transformation with the clinical fascination of someone studying a textbook case of bias in action. Her entire demeanor changed as if someone had flipped a switch. Her smile became genuine, her posture straightened, and suddenly the impossible became effortless. "Let me see what I can do for you," she said warmly, her fingers flying across the keyboard with enthusiasm. "You're in luck. We just had a cancellation in our premium cabin. Would you prefer window or aisle?" Marcus stood there holding a discount airline pamphlet while watching another passenger receive the exact service he'd been denied. Same casual clothes, same last-minute request, same flight. The only variable was skin color, and apparently that variable determined everything about the flying experience. "Interesting," Marcus murmured, just loud enough for Rebecca to hear. What she didn't know was that her fully booked first-class cabin was about to become very empty indeed. But the tragedy had not stopped yet. What happened next would prove that Rebecca's discrimination wasn't an isolated incident, it was part of a carefully coordinated system, and Marcus was about to discover just how deeply prejudice had infected his own aviation empire. "Actually, there seems to be a misunderstanding," Marcus said calmly, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had navigated hostile boardrooms and skeptical investors. "I have a confirmed first-class reservation, and I'd like to speak with your supervisor about the discrepancy." Rebecca's face tightened, but instead of addressing his concern, she reached for her radio with the practiced efficiency of someone who had handled difficult passengers before. "Sandra, could you come to the premium check-in counter? We have a situation that requires your attention." Within moments, the head flight attendant appeared, her uniform crisp and her expression stern. Sandra Mitchell had worked in luxury aviation for 15 years, and her demeanor suggested she'd seen every type of passenger complaint imaginable. She approached the counter with the confident stride of someone accustomed to resolving conflicts with authority rather than accommodation. "Is there a problem here?" Sandra asked, her tone implying that any problem was likely Marcus's fault. "This gentleman is insisting on first-class service, despite our policy regarding proper documentation," Rebecca explained, her voice taking on the victimized tone of someone who felt unfairly challenged. "He's becoming increasingly agitated about our standard verification procedures." Marcus felt his jaw tighten at the word agitated. He'd spoken in the same calm, professional tone throughout the entire interaction, but somehow his persistence had been reframed as aggression. It was a pattern he'd encountered countless times in his business career, black assertiveness automatically labeled as hostility. "Sir," Sandra said, fixing Marcus with a look that suggested he was wasting everyone's time, "I'm going to need you to lower your voice and provide proper identification and payment verification, or we'll have to ask you to leave the premises." "I haven't raised my voice once," Marcus replied, his tone steady as a pilot's during turbulence. "I'm simply asking for the same service that was just provided to another passenger with identical circumstances." Sandra's eyes narrowed, and she leaned closer to Rebecca, whispering something that Marcus's trained ear caught clearly. "Some people just don't understand that this level of service isn't for everyone. Should I call airport security?" The casual cruelty of the comment, the assumption that Marcus needed to be put in his place, ignited something deep in his chest. But he'd learned long ago that the best response to discrimination wasn't anger, it was documentation. His smartwatch had been recording everything, automatically uploading the audio and video to secure servers that his legal team could access within minutes. "You know what?" Marcus said, reaching into his backpack with deliberate slowness. "I think you're absolutely right. I should know exactly where I belong." What he pulled out next would transform this routine display of prejudice into a career-ending moment for everyone involved. Sandra and Rebecca had no idea that they were about to meet the man who signed their paychecks, owned their aircraft, and was about to ground their entire operation. "I do need to understand something about service standards," Marcus continued, his voice carrying a new edge that made Sandra take a step back, "particularly when those standards are being applied in my own company." The words hung in the air like the calm before a storm, but neither Sandra nor Rebecca understood the lightning that was about to strike their comfortable world of assumptions and prejudice. No one expected what happened next, but sometimes the most powerful voices come from the most unexpected places. As Marcus reached into his backpack, the tension in the premium terminal was thick enough to cut with a knife. But what emerged from the shadows of this discrimination would prove that courage doesn't always come from the most obvious sources. From across the polished terminal, a voice cut through the hostility like a beacon of hope piercing through storm clouds. "Mr. Sachs?" The voice belonged to Captain James Rodriguez, the senior pilot who was preparing for the 11:30 Miami departure. His uniform was immaculate, his presence commanding, but his eyes held the recognition that Rebecca and Sandra had completely missed. "Sir, are you conducting a service evaluation today?" The question landed like a bombshell in the pristine terminal. Captain Rodriguez had worked for Sachs Aviation for 8 years, ever since Marcus had personally recruited him from a major airline where Rodriguez had faced his own battles with discrimination as a Latino pilot. Marcus had seen something in Rodriguez that others had overlooked, not just exceptional flying skills, but the integrity and leadership qualities that made him perfect for the company's flagship routes. Rebecca's head snapped around so fast, her perfectly styled hair whipped across her face. "What did you just call him?" she demanded, her voice rising an octave as the first crack appeared in her confident facade. Captain Rodriguez looked between Marcus and the hostile ground crew, his weathered face showing the wisdom of someone who had navigated both turbulent skies and workplace prejudice. He'd seen Marcus's photo in company newsletters, had attended the quarterly meetings where Marcus spoke about excellence in aviation, and he recognized his CEO immediately despite the casual attire. "I said Mr. Sachs," Rodriguez replied with the calm authority of someone who had faced down air traffic control in emergency situations. "He's the founder and CEO of Sachs Aviation Solutions. This is his company." Sandra's face went pale, but instead of backing down, she doubled down on her authority. "Captain Rodriguez, you need to return to your pre-flight preparations immediately. Ground operations are not your responsibility." But Rodriguez wasn't intimidated. He'd faced down worse than a supervisor's anger, and he'd learned from Marcus's own example that sometimes doing the right thing meant standing up to people who thought they had power over you. "With respect, Sandra, I think treating our company's founder with dignity is everyone's responsibility." As the confrontation escalated, another witness emerged from the premium lounge area. Margaret Chen, a frequent flyer who had been sipping coffee while waiting for her connecting flight, had been watching the entire interaction unfold with growing discomfort. As a successful businesswoman who had experienced her own share of discrimination in corporate settings, she recognized the patterns playing out before her with crystal clarity. Margaret had been discreetly recording the interaction on her phone, her instincts telling her that what she was witnessing was more than just poor customer service. It was systematic discrimination that needed to be documented. Her business background had taught her that accountability required evidence, and her conscience wouldn't let her stand by while witnessing such clear ethical violations. "Excuse me," Margaret said, approaching the counter with the confidence of someone accustomed to boardroom negotiations. "I couldn't help but notice this situation, and I think you should know that I've been recording this entire interaction. As a frequent customer of premium aviation services, I've never witnessed such unprofessional treatment of a paying passenger." Sandra whirled around, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Ma'am, this is a private matter between staff and a passenger. I'm going to have to ask you to delete that recording and return to the lounge area." But Margaret stood her ground, her phone still recording. "Actually, as a witness to what appears to be discriminatory treatment, I believe this is very much a public matter. I'll be happy to share this footage with aviation authorities and social media if necessary." The terminal had become a stage where assumptions were being challenged and power dynamics were shifting by the second. Other passengers began to notice the commotion, their conversations quieting as they sensed they were witnessing something significant. Marcus watched this unfold with the strategic mind of someone who had built an empire by understanding human nature. Captain Rodriguez's courage in speaking up despite potential career consequences, Margaret's willingness to document injustice, even as a bystander, these were the kinds of people who gave him hope for the future of his industry. "You know what, Captain Rodriguez?" Marcus said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet terminal. "You're absolutely right. I should know exactly where I belong in my own company." Sandra and Rebecca exchanged nervous glances, finally beginning to understand that something was seriously wrong with their assessment of the situation. The confident discrimination they'd displayed moments earlier was cracking under the weight of witness testimony and documented evidence. Margaret continued recording, her business instincts telling her that she was capturing something that would become a case study in corporate accountability. Captain Rodriguez stood at attention, ready to support his CEO regardless of the consequences to his own career. What Marcus pulled from his backpack next would transform this moment from an incident of discrimination into a masterclass in corporate justice, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon against prejudice isn't anger, its identity. If you believe that courage comes in many forms and that standing up for what's right matters more than job security, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you think Marcus should do next. This story is about to reach heights that nobody expected, and trust me, you won't want to miss the moment when truth literally takes flight. Subscribe because stories of dignity in business inspire all of us to be better.
Right at that moment, the entire atmosphere in the premium terminal shifted as Marcus reached the point of no return. What happened next would be talked about in aviation circles for decades, but nobody in that polished terminal could have predicted the seismic shift that was about to transform their understanding of power, privilege, and the price of assumptions. Marcus stood in the center of the marble floor, surrounded by the hostile energy of Sandra and Rebecca, the supportive presence of Captain Rodriguez, and the watchful documentation of Margaret Chen. The weight of every discriminatory comment, every dismissive assumption, every attempt to diminish his worth based on his appearance had built to this crescendo moment. But instead of anger, his face showed something far more devastating, the calm certainty of someone who was about to deliver justice with precision timing. "You're absolutely right," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the suddenly hushed terminal with crystal clarity. "I don't belong in first class." He paused, letting the words settle as Sandra's face began to show the first hint of vindication. "Because I belong in the cockpit. I own the plane." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the kind of silence that occurs when the entire world seems to stop spinning, when everyone present realizes they're witnessing something that will fundamentally change everything they thought they knew about authority, assumptions, and the danger of judging worth by appearance. With deliberate precision, Marcus reached into his backpack and pulled out a leather portfolio that would shatter every assumption that had been made about him. He opened it slowly, revealing his commercial pilot's license with his name clearly displayed, followed by his CEO identification badge that read, "Marcus Sachs, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Sachs Aviation Solutions," in bold, unmistakable letters. "No," Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible as she stared at the credentials, then at the company logo behind her desk that she'd walked past thousands of times without connecting it to the man in front of her. "No, that's not possible. You can't be." But Marcus wasn't finished dismantling their world of assumptions. He pulled out official FAA documentation showing his ownership of the aircraft they'd been preparing to board, followed by the business license that established him as the primary shareholder of the very company they worked for. Each document was another nail in the coffin of their prejudice, another piece of evidence that the man they'd dismissed as unworthy was actually the person who determined their employment status. Sandra's face had gone from flushed red to ashen white, her hands trembling as the full magnitude of what they'd done began to sink in. She'd threatened to call security on the man who owned the security company. She'd questioned the documentation of the person whose signature was on every official company document. She'd whispered about people not knowing their place to the very person who had created every position in the company. "This is impossible," Sandra stammered, her voice cracking under the pressure of disbelief. "You're not! You can't be! You're just wearing jeans and a baseball cap." "Just what?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle but carrying the weight of decades of facing exactly this kind of discrimination. "Just a black man in casual clothes? Just someone who doesn't look like your idea of a CEO? Just a person who you assumed couldn't afford the services of his own company?" Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, his respect for Marcus evident in every gesture. "Sir, I tried to identify you earlier, but they wouldn't listen. I've been flying your routes for 8 years, and I've never seen anything like this treatment of any passenger, let alone our founder." Margaret Chen, still recording, felt her heart pounding as she captured what she knew was a historic moment of corporate accountability. "This is exactly why I started recording," she said, her voice filled with both anger and vindication. "I've seen this kind of discrimination before, but never with such a dramatic reversal of power. The other passengers in the terminal were now completely riveted, their travel plans forgotten, as they watched the most dramatic revelation any of them had ever witnessed. The white passenger who had been so easily accommodated looked mortified, clearly understanding that he'd been part of a system that had just exposed its ugly foundation.
But the most powerful moment came when Marcus walked over to the departure board that displayed information about his own aircraft. He pulled out his phone and, with a few taps, updated the flight status from on time to delayed operational review. The board refreshed instantly, showing his authority over every aspect of the operation. "That aircraft," Marcus said quietly, pointing toward the window where his flagship jet sat gleaming on the tarmac, "is registered under my name. The pilots work for me. The flight attendants report to me. The ground crew answers to me. And every single passenger who boards that plane deserves to be treated with the same dignity and respect, regardless of what they're wearing or what assumptions you make about them." Rebecca stared at the flight status board, watching as more updates appeared, showing Marcus's administrative access to systems she'd never even known existed. The company intranet, the employee database, the operational protocol's credentials granted him access to everything, proving beyond any doubt that he was exactly who he claimed to be. "Oh God," Rebecca whispered, her hand flying to her mouth as the full reality hit her like a collision with a mountain. "What have we done? What have we done to our own company?" Marcus looked around the terminal one more time, taking in the faces of everyone who had witnessed this moment: the passengers who had seen discrimination in action, the employees who had revealed their true character, the allies who had tried to intervene, and the witness who had documented it all. "What you've done," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had just reclaimed complete control of his domain, "is show me exactly what kind of culture exists in my company. And that culture is about to experience turbulence like it's never seen before." The transformation that followed would prove that sometimes the most powerful force against institutional prejudice isn't legislation or policies, it's accountability delivered by the very people who were targeted for discrimination. But the real shock was yet to come. What Marcus did next would prove that true authority isn't about revenge, it's about systematic accountability. And he was about to demonstrate exactly what that looked like when wielded by someone who had built an aviation empire on the principle that respect should be standard at every altitude. Marcus pulled out his phone with the calm precision of an air traffic controller managing a crisis situation. The terminal fell silent except for the distant hum of jet engines and Rebecca's barely controlled breathing. Every eye was fixed on this man, who had just transformed from dismissed passenger to the most powerful person in the building. "This is Marcus Sachs, CEO, authorization code Alpha 779er, he said into his phone, his voice carrying the authoritative tone that had commanded aviation authorities and regulatory boards across the nation. "Activate Operation Turbulence Protocol. Immediate implementation, all Sterling terminal operations." The words seemed to echo through the terminal like a control tower announcement, sealing the fate of everyone present. Within 60 seconds, the glass doors of the terminal slid open, and Marcus's executive aviation team walked in with the coordinated precision of an emergency response unit. His chief operations officer, Diana Martinez, led the group, followed by his legal counsel, Robert Kim, and his human resources director, Patricia Williams. Each carried tablets loaded with official documentation, their faces showing the serious professionalism of people who had been monitoring the situation in real time. "Mr. Sachs," Diana Martinez said, her voice respectful but urgent, "we've been monitoring the situation through your smartwatch feed. Legal has prepared immediate suspension protocols, and HR has documentation ready for a full investigation." Rebecca and Sandra watched in growing horror as they realized that everything they'd said and done had been recorded, analyzed, and transmitted in real time to a team of corporate executives who were now prepared to act with swift precision. The casual discrimination they'd displayed had been broadcast to a command center that had been evaluating their fitness for employment with clinical accuracy. "Ma'am," Robert Kim addressed Marcus while opening his tablet, "we have clear documentation of discriminatory treatment, violation of customer service protocols, and breach of multiple corporate policies regarding passenger dignity and equal treatment. The evidence is overwhelming and legally actionable." The other passengers in the terminal watched in fascination as they witnessed corporate accountability in action. This wasn't just about one man being mistreated. This was about systematic change happening before their eyes, a masterclass in how to address institutional discrimination with immediate, decisive action. Marcus turned to address the Sterling terminal staff directly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent years building an industry reputation for excellence. "Effective immediately, all flight operations from this terminal are suspended, pending a complete operational review. Rebecca Thompson and Sandra Mitchell, you are hereby suspended from duty without pay, pending a full investigation into your conduct and adherence to company standards." The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. "Mr. Sachs, please, I didn't realize. I never intended. This has to be some kind of misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Marcus replied, his voice measured but firm. "You told me I don't belong in first class. You handed me discount airline pamphlets while upgrading another passenger with identical circumstances. You threatened to call security on me for requesting equal treatment. Which part of that was a misunderstanding?" Sandra stepped forward, her face desperate as she watched her career crumbling in real time. "Mr. Sachs, there are procedures we follow, standards we maintain. We were just trying to protect the integrity of the premium service." "There are indeed standards," Patricia Williams interrupted, consulting her tablet with the efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this moment. Company Policy 3.2 clearly states that all passengers will be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of appearance, race, or perceived economic status. Policy 5.1 mandates that service availability be offered equally to all qualified customers. Policy 8.3 requires that staff maintain professional behavior at all times. You've violated every single one. Meanwhile, Margaret Chen stepped forward, her phone still recording this historic moment of corporate justice. "Mr. Sachs, I'm Margaret Chen, a frequent customer of premium aviation services. I've documented this entire interaction because I felt it was important to have evidence of the discrimination I witnessed. I'm prepared to share this footage to ensure accountability." Marcus turned to Margaret with genuine appreciation. "Mrs. Chen, your courage in documenting this situation demonstrates exactly the kind of integrity that makes aviation a better industry. Your willingness to stand up for what's right, even as a bystander, shows the character that real leaders must display." But the most powerful moment came when Marcus addressed Captain Rodriguez, who had risked his career to speak up. "Captain Rodriguez, your integrity in identifying me despite potential consequences shows exactly the kind of leadership we need in aviation. Your actions today demonstrate the courage that real professionals must have." As the investigation team began reviewing employee files and sealing documentation, Marcus made one final announcement that would resonate throughout the aviation industry. "This terminal will remain closed until we've rebuilt the culture from the ground up. Because aviation isn't just about moving people from point A to point B, it's about treating every passenger with the dignity they deserve, regardless of what they're wearing or what assumptions staff might make." Within hours, Margaret's footage would be viral, shared across platforms with hashtags like #AviationEquity and #Dignity in Flight. Aviation authorities would investigate. Industry publications would feature the story, and flight training programs would use it as a case study in customer service and bias prevention. What happened next would prove that real transformation requires more than just consequences. It requires a complete reimagining of what service excellence actually means. No one expected what Marcus would do next, but what unfolded over the following 30 days would prove that true leadership isn't about punishment, it's about elevation, and he was about to demonstrate how to transform a moment of discrimination into a movement that would change aviation forever. The Sterling Executive Terminal stood empty for exactly 30 days, its runways quiet, except for the occasional maintenance crew preparing for what would become the most comprehensive transformation in private aviation history. But behind those closed doors, something extraordinary was happening. Marcus had assembled a team of aviation equity specialists, community leaders, and reformed staff members who were working around the clock to rebuild not just policies, but the very culture of luxury air travel. The transformation began with Rebecca and Sandra, who found themselves at a crossroads that would define not just their careers, but their understanding of human dignity. Marcus had given them a choice that nobody in the industry expected: immediate termination with basic severance, or participation in an intensive rehabilitation program that would require them to confront their own biases and work directly with the communities they had discriminated against. "I don't understand," Rebecca had said during their first meeting with Marcus and the diversity consultant he'd brought in from Harvard Business School. "You're offering us a second chance after what we did to you?" Marcus looked at her with the same steady gaze that had guided him through turbulent flights and hostile boardrooms. "Rebecca, I believe people can change, but only if they're willing to examine their assumptions and understand the real impact of their actions. The question is, are you willing to do the work necessary to become the kind of professional this industry needs?" The program Marcus designed was unlike anything in corporate America. Rebecca and Sandra were required to spend 40 hours a week working at community airports, directly serving passengers from all economic backgrounds. They attended daily bias training sessions, participated in community forums where they listened to stories of travel discrimination, and worked with mentors who had experienced the kind of treatment they had inflicted on others. Sandra broke down during the second week of the program. "I convinced myself I was maintaining standards," she said, through tears during a group counseling session. "But I was really just protecting privilege. I made assumptions about people based on their clothes, their accent, their appearance, and I justified it by calling it professionalism." Marcus observed these sessions not with satisfaction, but with the analytical mind of someone studying organizational behavior. "The most dangerous discrimination," he told the rehabilitation group, "is the kind that hides behind policies and procedures. When we use standards as a code word for exclusion, we're not protecting excellence, we're protecting prejudice." Meanwhile, Captain Rodriguez found his career transformed in ways that exemplified Marcus's philosophy of rewarding courage. Marcus had promoted him to Chief of Flight Operations, a newly created position that put him in charge of ensuring that every crew member understood that dignity and safety were equally important in aviation. "Mr. Sachs," Rodriguez had said when Marcus offered him the position, "I was just doing what felt right. I don't know if I'm qualified for this kind of responsibility." "Captain," Marcus replied, "you demonstrated something that can't be taught in flight school, the courage to speak truth to power when you saw injustice happening. That's exactly the kind of leadership this company needs, at every level." Margaret Chen's role as a witness had earned her something even more valuable than viral recognition, a consulting position, helping Marcus develop passenger advocacy programs across his entire fleet. Her business background and willingness to document discrimination had made her the perfect person to help create systems that would prevent future incidents. "Your footage didn't just expose one incident," Marcus told her during their first consulting meeting. "It showed the world what accountability looks like when ordinary people refuse to stay silent in the face of discrimination. That kind of integrity is what transforms industries." The terminal's reopening was planned not as a celebration, but as a demonstration of transformed values. The marble floors remained pristine, but the atmosphere had been completely revolutionized. New staff had been hired, not just for their aviation credentials, but for their commitment to treating every passenger with equal dignity. Training programs focused on implicit bias recognition, cultural competency, and passenger advocacy were mandatory for all employees. But the most revolutionary change was the terminal's new operational model. Marcus had converted it into a hybrid facility, half traditional premium service for established clientele, half community aviation hub providing discounted flights for underserved communities. The same luxury lounges that had once been reserved for wealthy passengers now welcome travelers regardless of their economic status. "We're not just moving people between cities," Marcus explained to his newly trained staff during their orientation. "We're moving the entire aviation industry toward a future where dignity isn't determined by ticket price or appearance. Every passenger who walks through these doors deserves to feel valued, respected, and welcome." The community response was overwhelming. Business travelers who had been discriminated against at other facilities found themselves treated with unprecedented respect. Families who had never experienced premium aviation services suddenly had access to world-class treatment. The terminal, once filled with the tension of exclusion, now hummed with the energy of genuine hospitality. Even more remarkable was what happened to Rebecca and Sandra after completing their rehabilitation program. Both women had been fundamentally changed by their experience. Rebecca had requested to continue working in community aviation, discovering a passion for serving diverse passengers that she never knew existed. Sandra had become one of the company's most effective trainers, using her experience to help other staff members understand the real impact of assumptions and bias. "I can't change what I did," Rebecca said during a staff meeting 6 months after the incident, "but I can spend the rest of my career ensuring that no passenger ever feels the way I made Mr. Sachs feel. He didn't just give me a second chance, he gave me a purpose." The ripple effects extended far beyond the Sterling terminal. Other aviation companies began implementing similar equity programs. Flight training schools started requiring courses on passenger dignity and bias prevention. Industry organizations developed new standards for customer treatment that specifically addressed discrimination and inclusion. Marcus had proven that institutional change was possible, but it required more than policy updates. It required a fundamental shift in how people understood their responsibility to treat others with dignity, regardless of appearance or assumptions. The terminal's new mission statement, displayed prominently where passengers couldn't miss it, read, "Excellence in aviation begins with excellence in human dignity." What happened next would prove that the impact of one moment of courage could transform not just one company, but an entire industry's approach to service and respect. But the most powerful moment was yet to come. 6 months after that transformative Tuesday morning, Marcus stood on the tarmac of the Sterling Executive Terminal, preparing to answer a question that would define not just his company's legacy, but the future of dignity in aviation across the globe. The media had gathered for what they anticipated would be a routine follow-up story about the viral discrimination incident that had shocked the aviation industry. National news networks, aviation journalists, and industry publications had all come to document the terminal's remarkable transformation and the systemic changes that had rippled throughout the sector. But what they witnessed instead was something that would be quoted in business schools and corporate training programs for decades to come. A reporter from Aviation Weekly stepped forward, her microphone extended toward Marcus as his flagship aircraft gleamed behind him on the pristine tarmac. "Mr. Sachs, it's been 6 months since the incident that revolutionized how we think about service in aviation. You've transformed this terminal, changed countless lives, and sparked a global conversation about dignity in travel. Looking back at everything that's happened, what do you call this transformation?" Marcus paused, looking back at the terminal that had become a symbol of change throughout the aviation industry. Through the massive windows, he could see Captain Rodriguez training new pilots on bias prevention protocols. He could see Margaret Chen conducting a passenger advocacy workshop for ground crew members. He could see Rebecca working alongside community leaders to expand access to premium aviation services for underserved populations. "What do I call it?" Marcus repeated, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent his entire career fighting for this moment. He looked directly into the camera, knowing that his words would reach millions of people who had experienced similar discrimination in travel, business, and life. "I call it reaching new heights through grounded principles." The reporter pressed further, clearly sensing that this moment was becoming something historic. "Can you elaborate on what that means for the future of aviation?" Marcus's expression grew more serious, his voice taking on the tone of someone who understood that leadership meant more than just running a company. It meant setting standards for an entire industry. "Sometimes you have to ground everything to reach new heights." We grounded our operations, our assumptions, and our comfortable prejudices. Only then could we soar toward the kind of service that treats every passenger with the dignity they deserve. He gestured toward the aircraft behind him, each one now displaying the company's new logo and mission statement. "Every plane in our fleet now carries more than passenger sit carries a promise. A promise that respect isn't reserved for first class, that dignity isn't determined by designer clothes, and that excellence means treating everyone excellently." The transformation was visible everywhere. The terminal bustled with passengers from all backgrounds, all receiving the same world-class service that had once been reserved for a select few. Flight attendants moved through the cabin with genuine warmth, trained to see every passenger as valued rather than evaluated. Ground crew members greeted travelers with the same respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived economic status. But the most powerful testament to change was standing right beside Marcus. Rebecca, now wearing the uniform of a community aviation coordinator, stepped forward with confidence that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier. "Mr. Sachs changed my life by showing me that real professionalism means serving everyone professionally. I thought I was maintaining standards, but I was actually lowering them. Now, I understand that the highest standard is human dignity." Sandra, who had become the company's director of passenger advocacy, added her perspective. "The hardest part wasn't admitting I was wrong, it was understanding why I was wrong. Mr. Sachs didn't just correct our behavior, he helped us examine the assumptions that led to that behavior. That's what creates lasting change." Captain Rodriguez, now overseeing pilot training programs across the entire fleet, reflected on the broader impact. "What happened here wasn't just about one incident or one terminal. It was about proving that accountability and transformation are possible when leaders have the courage to address problems systemically rather than superficially." Margaret Chen, whose documentation had helped spark the transformation, spoke about the ongoing impact. "This story proves that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to stay silent. My phone footage became a catalyst, but the real power was in Mr. Sachs's response. He turned a moment of discrimination into a movement for dignity." The reporter asked one final question that would create the most memorable moment of the interview. "Mr. Sachs, what would you say to other business leaders who might be watching this story?" Marcus looked directly into the camera, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had transformed an industry through principled leadership. "I'd say that true altitude isn't measured by how high you fly, it's measured by how many people you lift up with you. If your business can't treat every customer with dignity, then you're not running a business, you're running a discrimination operation with a corporate logo." Behind him, the new company slogan gleamed on every aircraft: "Sachs Aviation, where dignity takes flight." The closing text appeared on screen as the story concluded. "Type elevation if you believe respect should be standard at every altitude." Within hours, millions of people had typed that single word, creating a global movement that extended far beyond aviation into every industry where discrimination still existed. Marcus had proven that sometimes the most powerful way to reach new heights is to ground yourself in the fundamental principle that every person deserves dignity. The sky was no longer the limit. It was the beginning of unlimited possibilities for change. What Marcus accomplished that day wasn't just about one terminal or one moment of discrimination, it was about something far more transformative. As someone who spent years analyzing corporate leadership and systemic change, I can tell you that what you just witnessed represents the difference between surface-level apologies and deep structural reform. Most companies respond to discrimination with diversity seminars and policy memos, but Marcus demonstrated what real transformation looks like when you have the courage to ground everything and rebuild from the foundation up. The profound lesson here isn't that we should all go undercover to catch bad behavior, it's that dignity should never be conditional on recognition, wealth, or appearance. Every Rebecca and Sandra in this story represents a system that judges worth by assumptions rather than humanity, and every Captain Rodriguez and Margaret Chen represents the choice we all have to either enable discrimination through silence or challenge it through courage, even when it's uncomfortable. What moves me most about this story is how Marcus proved that true leadership isn't about humiliation, it's about elevation. He could have simply fired everyone and moved on. But instead, he chose the harder path of transformation, giving people the opportunity to confront their biases and become better versions of themselves. That's the kind of leadership that doesn't just change policy as it changes hearts and minds. The reality is that discrimination in travel isn't rare's routine. Passengers are judged by their clothing, their accent, their perceived status, and their appearance every single day at airports around the world. But stories like this prove that change is possible when we refuse to accept that some people deserve less dignity than others, and when leaders have the courage to ground everything that's wrong to build something that's right. If this story inspired you, if it made you think about the assumptions you make about others, or if it reminded you that courage can come from unexpected places, then smash that like button and let me know in the comments what Dignity Takes Flight means to you. Subscribe to this channel because we're building a community of people who believe that respect shouldn't be a premium service, it should be the foundation of how we treat each other. Hit that notification bell because these stories of transformation and justice are exactly what our world needs right now, and trust me, the next story will take you even higher than this one.